All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. So we're going to be starting our review for our AP exam, and we're going to be going all the way back to time period number one. So for us, that was a long time ago. We did this during our summer assignment. So we probably need a good refresher on time period one and probably time period two as well. So the thing to keep in mind, I am not going to be reteaching you guys this material. If you need more in-depth look at time period number one, maybe go back and take a look at the screencast from the summer assignment if you really want like a deeper refresher. This is really just going to be a broad overview of the time period. I highly encourage you guys to dig a little bit deeper into all of these different time periods, and if there's a topic that you need more explanation on or you're a little bit confused about, I would just make sure that you understand that we're not going to go into a lot of detail, and it's up to you to kind of dig a little bit deeper into these topics. This is designed just to kind of refresh your memory and kind of like bring these topics back to the forefront of your mind. So what we're going to start with is kind of just a brief look at Native American society, because this time period starts in what's known as pre-Columbian civilizations, meaning civilizations before Christopher Columbus came to the New World, before the conquistadors came to Mexico like Cortez and Pizarro, and taking a look at Native American society. So the first thing that you really want to kind of emphasize in your notes and understand here is that we have the tendency to kind of look at Native American society and Native American tribes and kind of treat them in kind of like a blanket way, that they all share similar characteristics and similar lifestyles. That couldn't be further from the truth in a lot of cases. The big thing you want to understand here is that there's a lot of diversity in Native American societies, and geography plays a tremendous role in the types of societies and the types of cultures that develop. So just briefly, there's a couple of different geographic regions. You first have the Eastern Woodlands region, which is characterized by large amounts of deciduous forests. That's everything east of the Mississippi River, falls into the Eastern Woodlands Indians. In kind of like the center part of the country, east of the Rocky Mountains but west of the Mississippi, you have the Great Plains Indians, which is really characterized by grasslands similar to the savannas of Africa. And in that region, you have large herds of animals that a lot of Native American tribes are going to rely on for subsistence and survival. The other big region is kind of like the southwestern part of the United States, which is a very arid and dry climate. But the Southwest is also going to kind of give rise to a lot of farming-based societies. So I think the thing to kind of keep in mind here is to know how geography affects these different regions and the different tribes that develop there. So you want to have a good like specific example from each region. So I think in the Eastern Woodlands, there's two good examples. In the northern Eastern Woodlands, you have the Iroquois as a good example of a tribe that thrives in this area. And they're going to utilize the abundant timber to build these things called longhouses, in which they kind of develop their societies, and that's kind of how they group their villages. Now, the Iroquois are kind of a semi-nomadic tribe, so they do farm, but they farm kind of in a different style than the Europeans farm in, and that's, I think, an important aspect just to note down. In your southeastern woodland Indians, one of the most famous ones is going to be the Cahokia Indians, and they're going to develop, a pretty large society with, a large metropolis and a civilization that had between 15 and 30,000 people, depending on different historians' estimates. Now, the Cahokia Indians really are not in existence by the time that the Europeans arrive, but the remnants of their civilization still kind of is there. So they do have, some Native Americans do kind of build these larger societies with, cities and kind of larger metropolises. In the Great Plains, I think your best example would be the Sioux, although there are some others that you could use. And we talked about the Sioux a little bit later in our class when we kind of talked about westward expansion, and they're more of a nomadic style, live more of a nomadic lifestyle, and they rely heavily on the buffalo for their survival. In the Southwest, your most famous tribe is going to be the Pueblo Indians. And the Pueblo Indians are mostly a farming-based society, and they're going to rely heavily on the crop of maize, which we will call corn. So you want to understand, I think the big takeaway here is that there's different geographic regions. Each Native American tribe adapts to their different geographic regions and develops a different society and different lifestyle based off of the geography in which they live. Some develop vast trading networks, some develop larger cities, some are nomadic, some are semi-nomadic, some are settled in farming. So I would advise you to go a little bit deeper into some of these tribes to get better examples and more in depth than we can do here in this review. All right, now the next big kind of wave here is post 1492. So after Columbus comes to the New World and the Spanish start to try to colonize and conquer Native American tribes in Central and South America. So some of your famous conquistadors are Hernando Cortez, who is really going to be responsible for conquering the Aztec civilization of Central Mexico, and then kind of branches out and they conquer, most of Mexico and into even like the Southwest in the United States. Famously in South America, you have Pizarro, who is going to conquer the Incas. So you want to understand that this conquest is happening, and really what we have to focus on is the after effects of the Europeans coming and conquering. In this time period, it's mostly Central and South America and small parts of North America. And really what comes out of this is something called the Columbian Exchange, which is this vast exchange of crops, animals, products, and also diseases back and forth between the Europeans, Africa, and the New World, which classifies for North America and South America. And so what we have to kind of just take a look at is what is the big effect on each of the different areas. So we're first going to take a look at the effect on Native Americans and the New World. And overwhelmingly, if you really look at this, the big effects are pretty negative for Native Americans and the New World, the inhabitants. The biggest thing that the Europeans bring over that has a huge effect on Native American population is going to be diseases. So primarily, some of your biggest diseases that the Europeans bring across is smallpox, influenza, which is the flu, measles, and a variety of other diseases, which the Native Americans don't really have immunity for. And so this is just Mexico, but you can see the effect it has on the population. It goes from about 25 million, and only in about 30 years, their population drops to 5. In 60 years, it drops to below 1 million or about 2 million. So it's having a vast effect on your Native American population, which is going to affect Africa. It's going to also affect the labor within North America, and it really kind of changes the dynamics of the New World. As far as Africa is concerned, so really after Native American populations decline so rapidly, the Europeans have lost a labor source here in Central America and South America, and so they're going to turn to chattel slavery, and they're going to turn to the Atlantic slave trade from Africa into the New World to kind of replace that labor force. So you want to kind of make that connection. In this time period, in the early colonization time periods, primarily the Spanish, they're using Native Americans primarily as their labor force in the beginning. As their population dwindles mostly to disease, but also to overwork, they're going to turn to importing African slaves into the New World. And vast amounts are going to go into the Caribbean to work in the sugarcane plantations and the plantations of the Caribbean islands, and also vast amounts are going to go into South America, working in the cash crop plantations of South America and Central America as well. Now, as far as Europe is concerned, the Columbian Exchange has more of a positive impact on Europe, so it's going to really first increase the population of Europe. The diet of Europeans is going to improve substantially. And if you look here, their population is doubling from 1500 to 1800, more than doubling actually from 1500 to 1800. So it really kind of has a huge positive impact on European society. What this does is this leads to an excess of population, which Europeans are then going to use to kind of come to the New World and colonize the New World, whether it's the Spanish, the Portuguese, the British, or the French, later in like the 16 and 1700s. The other major effects it has on Europe is it's going to lead to a massive expansion of wealth in European society. There's going to be a huge influx of gold and silver into, specifically the Spanish colonies, Spanish mainland, and also Portugal. But also wealth in the form of cash crops that they're going to use to sell, like sugarcane and then later tobacco, and really make tremendous wealth off of the New World. All right, the last piece that we're going to kind of take a look at is we're going to kind of like central and focus on the Spanish colonial world. And what you want to keep in mind, we're going to go through the characteristics, political, economic, social, and religious of the Spanish colonial world. You want to be able in our next time period to compare the Spanish colonial world to the British and to the French. So you want to think later on, what are similarities and differences between these different colonial powers and how they administer their colonies. So the first thing to understand is politically, how did the Spanish really administer their colonies? And they set up something called viceroyalities in the New World. So like you're looking at a map here that shows the different viceroyalities a little bit later in history, but it's a good map to kind of just lay it out for you. And essentially what this means is they kind of divided up their colonies into these different regions called viceroyalities. And they would send somebody from Spain to administer that territory in the New World. And that would be the controller of the viceroyality and in this viceroy system. That person has complete authority over that piece of land or that, that region of the colonies. They're kind of an extension of the monarch. So there is no system here of where the Spanish colonists have a say within their government or there's voting. That's not really the system. It's a very direct control from the Spanish government and very limited rights to their settlers. It's really an extension of monarchical rule within the New World. Now, as far as socially and economically, the Spanish originally are going to set up something called the Encomienda System. And when you think of the Encomienda System, you want to compare this and think of feudalism, because this is based in European feudalism, this idea. And really what it's based in is, remember in feudalism, you have an exchange of land, labor amongst peasants and serfs for protection from noblemen. They farm the land and take care of the land, and in exchange they get protected by nobles within European society. Here, the Spanish conquistadors are going to kind of set up a similar idea. They want the Native Americans to work for them. So this is a forced labor system for Native Americans. They want Native Americans to mine for them, to find gold and silver and go into the mines and mine for them, and they want them to grow cash crops for them. In exchange, in the Encomienda system, the Spanish are going to say that they're going to bring to Native Americans two things. They're going to bring to them like civilization, the culture of Spanish society, and primarily they're going to bring them religion. Catholicism is going to be a big thing that they think they're going to impart to the Native Americans. Now, very quickly, this system becomes highly abusive, and the Native Americans are really exploited in the system, so much so that you have Spanish, religious figures speaking out against it. So the most famous person who speaks out against it is going to be a guy named Bartolomeo de las Casas. And de las Casas writes a piece called In Defense of the Indians, really criticizing the Encomienda system and saying that this is really an unchristian thing to do, what they're doing. And they're really exploiting the Native Americans. They're not bringing them religion in the way that they should, and they should really abandon the system. And ultimately, the Spanish government does decide to get rid of the Encomienda system, whether it's because of what de las Casas said in his criticisms, or it's more of a practical thing that Native Americans' population is declining because of exposure to disease. I'll let you guys kind of like debate that, but that really is kind of like, they're going to make a big shift, and they're going to shift away from the Encomienda system, and they're going to shift to really African slavery to replace the Encomienda system, kind of starting in the mid to late 1500s. And by the 1600s, African slavery really dominates this new world of the Spanish. Now, the Spanish in their new world, they're really going to set up a social class system that's very rigid, and it's based off of two things. Really race and your bloodline and your location of birth. So essentially, to be upper class, you had to be of Spanish birth, meaning from Spain, and you had to be born in Spain. So you had to be a white European from Spain, but you also had to be born there. That made you upper class. And that's the people who had all of your power positions in the Spanish colonies. They would be in charge of politically, military generals. Your next class, the Creoles. The difference here is that they're born in the New World. So they're Spanish background, but they're born in the New World. And they have, varying different degrees of mixtures that would kind of put you in a lesser social class, all the way down to like Native Americans and Africans at the bottom. Now, one of their big things, to kind of like end with, they really wanted to spread Catholicism in the New World. It's very important to the Spanish to kind of spread their religion and bring the religion to Native Americans, and that they see as a big part of the expansion of their culture. All right, we're going to wrap it right there.